Hello, welcome to Footprint to Africa. In recent years, a lot of investors see investing in Africa to be more attractive compared to other emerging markets. Today, we'll be speaking to an investor who believes that entrepreneurs in Africa are the driving force for the continent's economic growth. Paul Oberschneider is an entrepreneur and a best-selling author.
Gee, thank you for having me.
Let me begin by asking you, what makes an entrepreneur?
Well, many things, really. We're a different kettle of fish for certain. I worked in Wall Street for many, many years, and as a trader, as an investment banker, and I was never quite satisfied or happy with where I was and what I was doing. That's a whole other story, but I think that the mindset of entrepreneurs are different. You know, we count the dollars, we don't count the pennies. Most people count pennies and think about risk. We embrace risk. But I think there's probably something about an entrepreneur that makes us really different, and that is we all have some issue or some circumstance in our life that drives us to do different things, or things differently, if you will. If you think of all the successful entrepreneurs you can think of, whether it's Branson, whether it's Steve Jobs, whether it's Bill Gates, there's always a particular circumstance in their life that drives them to the next step. Whether it's being an orphan, whether it's being dyslexic, whether it's coming from a dysfunctional family, perhaps a family even with drugs or alcohol problems or whatever. It almost, at least in my opinion, and this is in my opinion and my story as well, as a young child, I could be in a room full of people, and yet I felt quite independent and almost isolated, as apart from the crowd. And throughout my life, I've always considered myself sort of apart from the crowd. I'm not one of the crowd. And I think that these circumstances put people in situations where they really have to depend on their own wits and their inner strength. They're almost proving to themselves that they can achieve and make changes, not to prove to other people, but almost to themselves, to validate their own being, if you will. And I think that for the vast majority of people, that's not an issue. Most people are just quite content to carry on and be part of that crowd going that way, and we're all thinking, well, actually, we'd like to go that way, So I think it's circumstance. And I think for entrepreneurs, no matter where they are, they have to really kind of look at themselves and look at their circumstances and build on that, It's the circumstances that create the opportunity.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Recently, you've talked about investing in startups in Africa. So what spurred your interest to help startups in Africa succeed?
Good question. In 1991, I went to Central and Eastern Europe.
Right.
And back then, if you had told somebody you were going to the Baltics, for example, they would have said, well, isn't there a war on there? They thought you were talking about the Balkans. Nobody knew where these places were. And those people that did know thought that it was dangerous. There was no governance. It was opaque and corrupt. And they were right, to a degree, because the media portrays a vastly different picture than what's actually happening on the ground. So what happens is very few people take those initial steps. Even when I was in Estonia, 80 kilometers away from Finland, even the Finns were reluctant to actually, in the beginning, to do things in that small country, which was right across the Baltic Sea from them, because of all these issues that I just mentioned. So that actually gives you quite an opportunity when the space is slightly uncontested, when the big money isn't really there yet. It gives people that are willing to take that step into the unknown and that risk. It gives them the opportunity to make mistakes, to try new things. I mean, for example, back then, some friends of ours, we were starting a bank. None of us knew anything about banking except don't write bad checks, you know. But yet, banks were started like that. And they were started by people that were 18, 19, 20 years old, because these were the people that were making things happen. Now, I look at that historically, and I look at what's happening in Africa. Now that market, that Central Eastern European market, was 60 million people if you include Poland, give or take.
Right.
Your market is 1 billion people, and growing. And growing. And you have the fastest organic GDP growth of probably all the continents on the planet right now.
Yeah.
Now, historically, people have looked at Africa as to what they could extract, take out, and sell, whether it be agriculture, oil, minerals, diamonds, gold. But for me, the real resource, in my opinion, is the 1 billion people, the human capital that is there. And that's the resource that nobody's really tapped into yet in a big way. Because that's the driving force of the continent. It's not what's in the ground. You know, you've had that for ages, you know. It's the people that are going to make it happen. And it's the young people. I mean, your population throughout the country is almost 50, 60% under the age of 55 years old. So you have a very young group of consumers and people that want to make great changes in their nations. And whilst the rest of the world sees it as opaque, dangerous, corrupt, and with lack of governance. So to me, that confluence of circumstance, again, circumstance, is an opportunity. That's why I'm so interested in your continent, because I see it as just a massive opportunity, not only for the people on the ground, but for the people outside that can come in and help, that mentor, help educate, invest, bring technology, knowledge into these markets.
Which is going to be very, can I say, benefit the world at large.
Absolutely.
So will your involvement in Africa be broad-based or restricted to specific sectors in the 5 countries that you mentioned recently that you're interested in?
Yeah. So I go with an open mind. And, you know, when I went to Central and Eastern Europe, I had no clue what I was. If you had asked me 25, 30 years ago what I was going to be doing, I couldn't have told you. Most people, you know, they come up with 5-year business plans and whatnot for the future. I didn't have a clue. I went with an open mind to look around, and, you know, when you show up, stuff happens. Now, it just so happens that through the 20 years or so that I was there, I became quite involved in financing, real estate mostly, real estate developments, building shopping centers, hotels, creating a mortgage company. So they were all really real estate related. So that's my background, is real estate. And then I'd say on the other side, it's marketing. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But I consider myself a pretty good marketer.
As an entrepreneur, did you suffer any personal difficulties in your journey? And do you think most entrepreneurs encounter difficulties?
Well, personal difficulties were part of the circumstance. So when I was on Wall Street as a trader, trading futures and equities, it was the 1980s. It was a pretty crazy and wild time. And I fell into a trap, basically. And to make a very long story short, I became an addict, basically. And I had a drug and an alcohol problem. And that, I lost my job, I lost everything. So really, I was at the bottom. I was at the rock bottom. You couldn't get much lower. And And I was at a point where either I was going to end up on the street and die, or I had to change something. And I made a massive change in my life, and I decided to turn it around and try and start basically all over, change the channel from black and white to go to color, you know? And I was able to rewrite that script, and that was a very difficult period of my life, because when I went to Central and Eastern Europe, all I had in my pocket was, and which was all I had, which was $400. So I started all my businesses basically with a plane ticket and $400, and over 20 years grew, you know, several businesses worth well over 200 million pounds. So that was the circumstance. That was the difficult issue. If you can get over that kind of an issue, other issues are rather small and inconsequential. So, you know, I've had people come into my office, you know, Russian mafia guys come in and point guns at me. I've had bombs blow off. I've had all kinds of interesting, and, you know, strangely, none of it really ever affected me to turn around and give up or quit. Because once you take that attitude, then there's no coming back. So, but a lot of, and I think ask any entrepreneur behind closed doors, I think one of the fundamental things, at least in my case, that I had to have was a tremendous amount of, I almost don't want to say it, but a tremendous amount of spiritual, if you will, say, faith. And I always went forward knowing that everything would be okay. Success was right around the corner, whether I could see it or not, you know, and there was no point in giving up, because if I would give up, I would miss that corner, you know, and you have to have that mindset to make it happen.
And what would you say is the best age to start up a business?
Well, any age, right now. You know, if you're thinking about it, then it's probably the right time. You know, the younger the better, the more mistakes you can make, the less you have to lose. I think as you know, it might be slightly more difficult for older people to take those risks, because they have the mindset that they have possessions, they have things, they have responsibilities, and if it goes wrong, their reputation may be damaged, they may lose things. So I think the older you get kind of on the spectrum, the less willing, obviously, you are to take risk. But look, you know, I'm 58 years old, and I have lots of things to risk, and I just don't think you can think about life that way. You just have to keep moving forward.
So, can I ask, what's your take on entrepreneurial diversification?
The problem with entrepreneurs in general, me included, is that we all have 100 ideas every day. And, you know, if you start chasing all these ideas, you end up chasing your tail and you don't do anything. So the most difficult thing, I think, is finding that one thing that you need to be doing and focusing solely on that. Now, from that, diversification will happen organically. So when we had our real estate business, you know, it was natural for us to go into property management. When we were into the residential home business, it became natural for us to create a mortgage company to help people acquire homes. As we had all that information coming into all of our agency offices, we became developers because we knew what was happening on the ground. So from one day, not doing any development, to the next, one of my guys came in and put a map on the table and said, this is where we need to build our first grocery store. Now, the day before, I had never built a grocery store. So you diversify as you need to diversify, but always based on a core business. So you create tentacles, baskets of business within a core. And the beauty of that, of course, is that when you do that, you don't need to exit one business. You can pick and choose. You can exit different businesses at different times. You know, you're not beholden to just one thing. So diversification is good. Building baskets of business is good, but it needs to be around a core of knowledge and expertise that is the single business.
Right. So in other words, an ecosystem that is
Yeah.
in a similar business.
Exactly.
That's good. So what inspired you to write Why Sell Tacos in Africa?
I'll tell you, it was never meant to go like this. Somebody said, write a book. So I wrote a book, and it was more of a memoir. And the agent looked at it and said, is this a memoir or is this a business book? So I took some of the business principles out of the original book, and I created this book. Now, while I was writing this book, I met a young Nigerian in London who was starting a business in London, and I asked him, well, why aren't you doing this in Lagos? Because it makes perfect sense. And he was trying to start this business in a hotly competitive, the most competitive market in the world, London. And I just thought it was kind of absurd. So I wrote some of that story into this book. And when I finished the book, I hadn't had the title yet. I wanted it to be a catchy title, of course, but I wanted it to be about emerging markets. Now, so I just happened to go on the map and looked at Google, and I thought, how many Mexican restaurants are there in the continent of Africa? Well, there are not many, I can tell you. There are a few, but not many. And I thought, oh, that's a great analogy for doing something in an uncontested market. So it was Why Sell Tacos in Africa is a metaphor for doing business in blue sky or blue ocean markets in uncontested space.
Right, that's interesting.
And from that title, then interestingly, people have read the title, they've contacted me like yourselves, and this whole Africa thing has started to really take on meaning for me, not just about the book, you know. So it's been an interesting kind of journey, if you will, and I'm not sure where it ends, you know.
And who are your target audience?
I'd say young people. You know, people looking for some inspiration, people that don't think they can do things. Because this book clearly demonstrates, Why Sell Tacos in Africa, clearly demonstrates that you can be at the bottom with no way out and do this. I mean, if I can do it, you know, I wasn't great in school, I wasn't the smartest guy, I was, you know, just an ordinary guy who then found himself in big trouble, and I was able to make some massive changes in my life. And I think if you follow some simple paths and you're open and you show up and you have that faith that is unstoppable, that you can pretty much do whatever you want. So it's for young people, it's for that group of people like I met in Central and Eastern Europe years ago that wanted to change their lives. They wanted to create something better for themselves from the 50 years of Soviet occupation, you know. And I think there's a thread of that going on in Africa right now, all over, and globally, whether it's India, China. I mean, you get, I don't know how many millions of Chinese kids coming out of school every day, graduate school, and they can't find jobs. There are not enough jobs for people. So people have to create jobs. They have to create their own futures. You know, I was at dinner last night and a mom was saying, you know, I'm really scared for my kids because, you know, we had some good chances, we had good luck, but, you know, this has become a very global community, very competitive, and there aren't enough jobs for our kids. What are they going to do? So you need to really kind of think outside the box.
Finally, what would you say are the basic steps to recovering from a failed business adventure?
The one thing I learned on Wall Street is when you're wrong, admit it. The problem with most investors is they do the exact opposite. Whether it's in a business or whether it's in equities or whatever, they always think it's going to get better. You know, the stock goes down 10%. Oh, I can't sell now because I'll lose too much money. It goes down another 10%. Oh, and I really can't sell now because I'll lose too much money. Actually, as soon as you realize that you're in the wrong place, in the wrong neighborhood, in the wrong business, and get out and start again. Because it takes far more effort to dig yourself out of a hole when you're down there than it does to just jump out of a small puddle, if you will, you know? So I think too many people stick with the wrong thing for too long. And, you know, now, yes, there are going to be problems. Yes, there's going to be difficulties. If you believe passionately in your business, fine. But if you're doing it just because you don't want to lose the money or you've put in so much time, and then that's the wrong reason to stay in, you know. So get out quickly.
Interesting. Thank you, Paul. It's been good talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, it's been great. Thanks.